They tried to guilt me into obedience. I chose freedom. Before I share this story, I want to know you're here with me. Just comment listening below or let me know where you're watching from. If you've ever been made to feel guilty for choosing yourself over family expectations, this story is for you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to carry weight that was never yours to carry. Thank you for being here. Now let me tell you what happened. The Manchester Grand Hotel ballroom glittered with 300 guests celebrating my father's 65th birthday. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across tables draped in white linen. Waiters moved silently between conversations, refilling champagne glasses and clearing plates. I sat at the family table near the center, uncomfortable in the expensive suit my mother Catherine had insisted I wear. My brother Thomas sat to my left, confident and relaxed. My sister Emily was on my right, scrolling through her phone between courses. Edward Whitmore, my father, stood at the microphone holding a crystal glass. His voice carried across the room with practiced authority. He was thanking business partners, longtime clients, and family friends. Everyone listened attentively. "I'm blessed with 3 wonderful children," he said, turning toward our table. "Thomas, who runs our northern operations with such skill." He raised his glass toward my brother. The room applauded politely. "Emily, whose marketing genius has transformed our brand." More applause. Emily smiled graciously. Then his eyes passed over me. Not quickly, but deliberately. He paused, took a sip of champagne, and continued speaking about the company's future plans. I had been skipped, erased from the narrative as if I didn't exist. A few guests noticed the omission and exchanged uncomfortable glances. Most didn't seem to register it at all. My mother Catherine leaned close and squeezed my arm tightly. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Just smile. Don't embarrass us." I sat frozen, my hands clenched under the table. The message was clear. My silence was the obedience they expected. My invisibility was the role I was meant to play. After dinner, my father cornered me in the hotel's private lounge. Thomas and Emily had gone to mingle with guests. We were alone except for the bartender at the far end. "We need to talk about your future," Edward said without preamble. He wasn't asking. He was informing. "What about it? This London career of yours, working for someone else. It's time you came home and joined the family business properly." I had been expecting this conversation for months. "I'm happy where I am." "Happy?" He said the word like it was distasteful. "You're wasting your education working for strangers. Whitmore Holdings needs you here in Manchester. Thomas and Emily are already at the company. You don't need me." His expression hardened. "This isn't a request, Daniel. It's what's best for the family." "Best for the family, or best for you?" Edward's jaw tightened. "If you refuse, there will be consequences. Financial support, family standing, your name on certain agreements. All of that can change very quickly." The threat hung in the air between us. "What agreements?" I asked carefully. He smiled without warmth. "We'll discuss the details when you accept the position. For now, just know that your interests and the company's interests are more connected than you realize." Catherine appeared in the doorway. "Edward, guests are asking for you." He nodded and turned back to me. "Think carefully about your answer. Some decisions can't be undone." After he left, I sat alone in the lounge feeling cold despite the warm room. Something about his words felt like a trap I hadn't seen being set. I pulled out my phone and searched for Whitmore Holdings in the business registry. When I found the corporate documents, my stomach dropped. My name appeared in places I didn't remember signing for. That night in my hotel room, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about patterns I had spent years trying to ignore. When I was 16 and won a scholarship to study economics at Cambridge, Edward had called it showing off and suggested I attend a local university instead. When I graduated with honors and accepted a position at a London investment firm, he said I was abandoning the family. Every achievement I earned independently was dismissed. Every choice that took me away from his control was labeled as betrayal. I had always thought it was just his personality. Demanding, controlling, traditional. But lying in that hotel bed, I started seeing it differently. It wasn't personality. It was strategy. A deliberate pattern of making me feel guilty for wanting independence. Guilt was his leash, and I had been wearing it for 32 years. My phone buzzed with an email from my accountant in London. The subject line read, "Urgent. Your name on Whitmore Holdings documents." I opened it with shaking hands. "Daniel, I was doing routine checks on your financial exposure and found something concerning. You're listed as guarantor on several substantial loans taken out by Whitmore Holdings. The liability attached to your name totals approximately £850,000. Did you authorize this?" I read the email 3 times before the meaning fully settled in. No, I had not authorized guarantees totaling nearly £1 million. But somehow, my signature appeared on documents I didn't remember signing. The trap wasn't being set. It was already closed around me, and the liabilities tied to my name were dangerously real. I spent the next week investigating. My accountant pulled every document with my name attached to Whitmore Holdings. What we found was worse than I imagined. Over the past 3 years, Edward had listed me as guarantor or co-signer on 6 different high-risk loans. The total exposure was £1.2 million. If the company defaulted, creditors could come after me personally. How is this possible? I asked my accountant during an emergency video call. I never signed most of these. Some signatures look legitimate. Others appear to have been authorized through power of attorney clauses in documents you did sign years ago. I remembered. When I first joined the company briefly after university, Edward had me sign a stack of paperwork. Standard family business documents, he had said. I was 23 and trusting. Can they enforce this? Legally? Possibly. Some of these authorizations are questionable, but challenging them would require expensive litigation. And if Whitmore Holdings is genuinely in financial trouble, creditors won't care about the details. They'll pursue whoever's name is on the documents. Is the firm in trouble? I can't access their internal accounts, but the pattern of borrowing suggests cash flow problems. Aggressive expansion during uncertain economic times. That's usually a warning sign. I hung up and sat staring at my laptop screen. Edward hadn't just threatened to sever financial ties. He had already bound my financial future to his company without my full consent. If Whitmore Holdings collapsed, my career, my savings, my entire future could be destroyed. And, judging from the borrowing patterns, the firm was quietly sliding toward exactly that kind of trouble. The family meeting was called for the following Saturday at the Whitmore estate outside Manchester. Catherine said it was just a casual lunch. But Thomas texted me privately. "Dad's planning something. Be ready." I arrived to find the entire family assembled in Edward's study. Thomas and Emily sat on the leather couch. Catherine stood near the window. Edward sat behind his massive oak desk like a judge at a tribunal. "Daniel, thank you for coming," Edward said formally. "We need to discuss your role in the family business." He slid a folder across the desk toward me. Inside were new documents, contract amendments, updated guarantees, authorization forms. "These formalize your position as co-director of Whitmore Holdings," he explained. "It's time you took proper responsibility for the family legacy." I looked at the papers carefully. They weren't just titles. They attached even more liability to my name while giving me no actual authority over company decisions. "I'm not signing these," I said calmly. The room went silent. Edward's expression darkened. "Excuse me," I said. "I'm not signing. I don't want a position at Whitmore Holdings. I have a career in London that I'm staying in." "You ungrateful." Edward stood abruptly. "After everything this family has given you, after all the opportunities, the education, the connections, and this is how you repay us." "I've repaid you by building my own success," I said quietly. "That should be enough." "It's not about enough." His voice rose. "It's about loyalty. It's about family. Your brother and sister understand that. Why can't you?" Thomas shifted uncomfortably on the couch. Emily stared at her hands. "This is betrayal, Daniel," Catherine said softly, her weapon of choice always being guilt rather than anger. "Pure betrayal." I stood up and placed the unsigned documents back on the desk. If refusing to destroy my own future is betrayal, then I'm guilty. I walked out before anyone could respond. That evening, Thomas showed up at my hotel unannounced. He looked exhausted, older than his 35 years. "We need to talk," he said. "Privately." We went to a quiet pub 3 streets away. Thomas ordered whiskey and didn't speak until the bartender was out of earshot. The firm is drowning, he said finally. Dad's expansion into European markets was a disaster. We're hemorrhaging cash every month. The loans you saw are just the tip of it. How bad? We're maybe 6 months from insolvency if we can't restructure. Maybe less. I felt sick. And you all expected me to save it? Dad did. He thinks if you come back and we present a united family front, investors will have confidence. He thinks your reputation in London finance will stabilize things. That's insane. I know. Thomas drank half his whiskey in one swallow. But he's desperate. And desperate people make terrible decisions. He's already told the board you're coming back as co-director. What? There's a press event scheduled for next Friday. He's planning to announce the leadership restructuring, with you as the financial savior returning to rescue the family business. I never agreed to that. He doesn't care. He's gambling that once it's public, you'll be too embarrassed to back out. Too guilty about the family reputation. I sat back, processing this. He's going to announce me as co-director to 300 journalists without my consent? Thomas nodded miserably. And if you don't show up, or if you contradict him publicly, it destroys the company's credibility immediately. He's weaponizing your own decency against you. The trap was worse than I thought. Edward wasn't just binding me legally. He was binding me socially and morally, counting on my guilt to keep me silent. Friday arrived. The press event was held at the Whitmore Holdings headquarters in central Manchester. I showed up, but not for the reason Edward expected. The conference room was packed with journalists, industry analysts, and business reporters. Cameras lined the back wall. Edward stood at a podium with the company logo behind him. He delivered his prepared remarks about growth, innovation, and family legacy. Then came the announcement. I'm pleased to introduce the newest member of our executive leadership, my son Daniel, returning from London to serve as co-director and lead our financial restructuring. Cameras flashed. Journalists began typing. Edward gestured for me to join him at the podium. I walked forward slowly, very aware that every eye in the room was on me. I took the microphone from my father's hand. Thank you for that introduction, I said clearly. But I need to make a correction. I have not agreed to join Whitmore Holdings as co-director. I currently work in London and intend to continue doing so. The room erupted. Journalists shouted questions. Cameras focused on Edward's face, which had gone pale. Daniel, he started. I was not consulted about this announcement. I continued calmly. Any reports stating I'm joining the company are inaccurate. Thank you. I handed the microphone back and walked out of the room. Behind me, I could hear Edward trying to salvage the situation, his voice strained with barely controlled fury. The family image had fractured publicly, and I had been the one to break it. The fallout was immediate and brutal. My phone exploded with angry messages from relatives I barely knew. Aunt Beatrice. How could you humiliate your father like that? After everything he's done for you, Cousin William, you just destroyed the family reputation for your own ego. Uncle Harrison, Edward is devastated. This is unforgivable. Catherine called 17 times before I finally answered. Daniel, what have you done? Her voice was shaking. You've made us a laughingstock. Business partners are calling. Investors are panicking. You have to fix this. I didn't create this situation. Edward did. You're his son. You're supposed to support him, not sabotage him. Support him in lying to journalists? In forcing me into a position I never agreed to. For the family. She was crying now. You do things for family even when it's hard. That's what love means. That's what manipulation means, I said quietly. She hung up. That afternoon, my accountant called with worse news. A major creditor had seen the press coverage and was now demanding immediate repayment of £200,000. They're spooked by the public confusion, he explained. If the company can't pay, they'll pursue the guarantors, which includes you. How long do we have? 30 days. Maybe less. I sat in my hotel room as the Manchester rain beat against the windows. Every choice seemed designed to hurt someone. Stay silent and protect the family, but destroy myself. Speak truth and protect myself, but damage everyone else. Then I remembered something my mentor in London had once told me. When people try to make you choose between your integrity and their comfort, that's not a dilemma. That's clarity. I spent the next week quietly investigating Whitmore Holdings' financial records. What I found made me physically sick. Edward hadn't just been reckless with expansion. He had been actively falsifying internal accounts to hide losses from board. Money that appeared as European revenue was actually just loans moved between subsidiary accounts. Profits that seemed healthy were mostly paper gains with no actual cash backing them. And the worst part, if regulators ever investigated, all the questionable transactions had my name attached as authorizing signatory. Edward had been systematically building a paper trail that would shift blame onto me if the scheme collapsed. I wasn't just a guarantor. I was being set up as a potential scapegoat. My hands shook as I read through the evidence. Page after page of manipulated numbers, false reports, and deceptive accounting. My phone rang. An unknown London number. Mr. Whitmore? This is Helen Yates from the Financial Conduct Authority. We're conducting a routine audit of several firms, including Whitmore Holdings. We'd like to schedule an interview with you regarding some transactions flagged in our review. The walls were closing in. Regulators were requesting an audit. If they found what I had just found, criminal charges were possible. And my name was all over the documents. I had perhaps weeks before this exploded into something far worse than a family dispute. I sat in my hotel room, staring at the evidence spread across my desk. Two choices seemed clear. Option 1, expose Edward. Show regulators the falsified accounts and how my name was used without proper authorization. It would clear me legally, but destroy the company immediately. 200 employees would lose their jobs. The family would be ruined publicly. Option 2, stay silent. Let the audit happen and hope regulators didn't dig too deep. But if they found the fraud, I could face criminal liability for transactions I never actually authorized. Both options felt impossible. I called my London mentor, a man named Patrick who had guided my career for 10 years. What do I do? I asked after explaining everything. You're framing this wrong, he said carefully. You're asking which choice hurts fewer people. But there's a third path. What? Protect yourself first, then see what can be salvaged. You can't save anyone if you're drowning. That night, I designed a strategy that didn't fit either extreme. I would protect myself legally without directly exposing Edward to regulators unless absolutely necessary. I would create distance from the company's liability while giving it a chance to restructure properly. It required precision, legal documentation, professional advisors, and perfect timing. But it was the only path that didn't force me to choose between self-destruction and family destruction. Over the next 2 weeks, I quietly gathered documentation. Every loan agreement, every guarantee, every transaction with my name attached. I organized everything chronologically with notes on what I had actually authorized versus what had been done using old power of attorney clauses. I hired a Manchester solicitor who specialized in corporate liability. We reviewed every document carefully. This is actionable, she said. Several of these guarantees appear to exceed the scope of your original authorizations. We can file protective disclosures that limit your personal exposure. Will that damage the company? It will complicate their borrowing capacity, but it removes you from the liability chain. The company will need to restructure debt under different terms. How long does this take? If we file next week, the protections are active within 30 days. I authorized her to proceed. Meanwhile, Edward's pressure escalated. He showed up at my hotel unannounced twice. He sent Thomas and Emily to convince me to reconsider for everyone's sake. He had Catherine call me crying, but I could see the pattern now. Every guilt trip, every tearful plea, every appeal to family loyalty, all designed to make me sacrifice myself for a problem Edward created. I stopped answering their calls. The intervention happened on a Tuesday evening. I returned to my hotel to find my entire family waiting in the lobby. Edward, Catherine, Thomas, Emily, Aunt Beatrice, Uncle Harrison, and 3 cousins I barely knew, all sitting in a semicircle of chairs like a staged ambush. We need to talk, Catherine said. Her voice had that practiced sadness that always preceded manipulation. About what? About your responsibility to this family. They took turns speaking. Each one delivered a prepared statement about sacrifice, loyalty, and duty. About how I was destroying everything Edward built. About how selfish I was being. Catherine delivered the final blow. Your father worked his entire life to build something for you. For all of you. And now, when he needs you most, you abandon him. How can you live with yourself? I listened to the entire performance. 15 minutes of guilt delivered like a courtroom prosecution. Then I stood up. I'm done, I said quietly. Sit down, Edward commanded. We're not finished. Yes, we are. I'm not signing anything. I'm not joining the company. I'm not accepting liability for choices I didn't make. And I'm not carrying guilt for problems I didn't create. You're destroying this family, Catherine whispered. No, I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. I walked out of the hotel lobby and didn't look back. The next morning, my solicitor filed protective disclosures removing my personal guarantees and establishing formal legal separation between my assets and Whitmore Holdings liabilities. The documents triggered an immediate reaction. Within 48 hours, creditors received notice that I was no longer guaranteeing Whitmore Holdings' debt. This forced the company into emergency restructuring. External financial advisors were brought in. Creditors demanded new terms. The entire capital structure had to be reorganized. And critically, this process removed Edward from operational control. Creditors appointed an interim management team to stabilize the company while restructuring negotiations proceeded. Edward called me screaming, "You've destroyed everything." The board voted to suspend my authority. "You destroyed it yourself," I said calmly. "I just stopped letting you destroy me too. This company is my life. Then you should have run it honestly." He hung up, but not before I heard something I'd never heard before in his voice. Genuine fear. The restructuring process was brutal for the Whitmore family reputation. Financial analysts published articles questioning Edward's leadership. Industry publications discussed the management crisis at Whitmore Holdings. The extended family blamed me entirely. Cousin William posted on social media, Daniel Whitmore chose his own interests over 200 employees and his own father. This is what selfishness looks like. The post was shared hundreds of times. Comments piled up calling me greedy, ungrateful, and worse. Uncle Harrison organized a family meeting where I wasn't invited. They collectively decided to distance themselves from me publicly. My professional contacts in Manchester grew cautious. Some stopped returning calls. A speaking engagement was quietly canceled. Edward himself appeared on a business podcast and delivered a carefully crafted statement. Sometimes family members lose sight of what matters most. I'm disappointed in choices made by people I trusted, but I remain focused on saving the company and protecting our employees. The implication was clear without directly naming me. I was the villain. He was the victim. The reputation war was fully engaged. For 3 weeks, I existed in a strange professional isolation. Former colleagues weren't hostile, but they were careful. No one wanted to be associated with family drama that made headlines. I returned to my London flat and tried to focus on my actual job, but the stress was constant. Every notification on my phone felt like another attack. Then something unexpected happened. A former employee of Whitmore Holdings contacted me through LinkedIn. Her message was brief. "Mr. Whitmore, I don't know if this helps, but many of us at the company know what actually happened. Your father was bleeding us dry with his expansion disaster. You probably saved our jobs by forcing the restructuring. Thank you." More messages followed over the next few days. Current and former employees sending private notes of support. They couldn't say anything publicly without risking retaliation, but they wanted me to know the truth. A senior accountant wrote, "Edward was cooking the books for at least 2 years. Everyone in finance knew, but was too scared to speak up. You did the right thing." The operations manager sent. The new management team already stabilized 3 critical issues Edward was ignoring. The company might actually survive now. These messages didn't repair my reputation publicly, but they did something more important. They confirmed I hadn't been wrong. 6 weeks after the restructuring began, I received a surprising email. Catherine wanted to meet. Just the 2 of us. No Edward. No agenda except talking. I agreed cautiously. We met at a quiet cafe outside Manchester, far from anywhere we might be recognized. She looked smaller somehow, tired. Her usual carefully maintained appearance had cracks. No jewelry, minimal makeup, just a woman who seemed exhausted by performance. "I need to tell you something," she said before I could even sit down. Something I should have said years ago. I waited. I enabled him. For 30 years, I enabled your father's control. I told myself I was keeping peace, that I was protecting the family. But really, I was just afraid. Afraid of what? Of what it would cost me to stand up to him. Of losing the life I'd built. The status. The security. She looked down at her hands. So, I let him do whatever he wanted. To the business. To you. And I weaponized guilt to keep everyone in line because that's what he needed me to do. This was the first honest thing she'd said to me in years. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because I watched him have a breakdown last week. Complete collapse. And I realized we did this to him. I did this. By never challenging him. By always supporting his worst instincts. I helped create a monster he couldn't control." She was crying now, quietly. "I'm sorry, Daniel. For everything. For making you feel guilty for wanting your own life. For choosing his comfort over your safety. For being a coward when you needed a mother." I didn't know what to say. This was the apology I'd wanted for years, but also felt too late and too painful. "Thank you for saying that." I managed finally. We sat in silence for a while. Then she asked, "Is there any way forward?" "Maybe, but not backward." Catherine's words stayed with me. Edward had suffered a breakdown. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me just felt sad. A week later, he called my phone directly. Not angry this time, just tired. "Daniel, can we meet?" We arranged to meet at the same cafe where Catherine and I had talked. When Edward walked in, I barely recognized him. He lost weight. His usual commanding presence was gone, replaced by something that looked like defeat. "I'm not here to argue," he said, sitting down carefully. "I'm here to listen if you're willing to talk." This was so unlike him that I didn't know how to respond. "What do you want to hear?" I asked. "The truth. About why you did what you did." So I told him. Everything. About discovering the guarantees I never fully authorized. About finding the falsified accounts. About the impossible choice between protecting myself and protecting a company being run dishonestly. "I wasn't trying to hurt you," I finished. "I was trying to survive what you built around me." He was quiet for a long time. "I convinced myself I was building a legacy," he said finally. "But I was really just building control. Control over the business. Control over you and Thomas and Emily. Control over everything because the thought of losing it terrified me." "Why?" "Because my father lost everything when I was young. Bankruptcy. Humiliation. I swore I'd never let that happen to me. So I built walls. Bigger and higher. Until I couldn't see over them anymore. It was the closest thing to an explanation I'd ever heard from him. "I put you in an impossible position," he continued. "I used your name without your real consent. I tried to trap you into saving me. That was wrong." "Yes, it was. Can you forgive me?" I thought about it carefully. "I don't know, but I can set boundaries. Clear ones. And if you respect them, maybe we can figure out something that works." "What kind of boundaries?" "Complete financial separation. No shared liability. No pressure about joining the company. And no more guilt about choosing my own path." He nodded slowly. "Those are fair." The restructuring of Whitmore Holdings took another 3 months. The new management team, freed from Edward's controlling interference, actually stabilized the company. Debt was reorganized. Unprofitable ventures were closed. The European expansion disaster was unwound carefully. Edward was kept as chairman, but with limited authority. Real operational control sat with professional managers who knew what they were doing. Against all odds, the company survived. Employees kept their jobs. Creditors got repaid on new schedules. The crisis passed, and I remained completely separate from all of it. My name was removed from every document. My career in London continued without interference. Edward and I spoke occasionally, carefully, not as father and son trying to pretend the past didn't happen, but as two people learning to relate honestly. He offered advice once about a professional situation I was navigating. "Can I make a suggestion?" he asked carefully. "As advice?" "Yes." "As pressure?" "No." "Understood. Just advice then." It was a small moment, but it represented a permanent shift in our dynamic. He no longer had power over me. I no longer needed his approval. We could talk as equals, or not at all. The choice was mutual now. The extended family slowly began acknowledging what had actually happened. Uncle Harrison, who had been so quick to condemn me, sent a brief email. I've seen the restructuring reports. I understand now why you did what you did. I'm sorry for my earlier judgment. Other relatives followed. Not all of them. Some stayed loyal to the old narrative where I was the betrayer. But enough of them came around that family gatherings became possible again. Thomas told me privately, "You saved us, you know. If you'd given in to the guilt and signed those documents, we'd all be bankrupt now." The company needed that restructuring. Dad just couldn't admit it. Emily, who had been silent through most of the crisis, finally spoke up at a family dinner. "I was terrified of Daniel's honesty," she admitted. "Because if he could refuse Dad's control, what did that mean about the rest of us still obeying? That was the real threat I'd represented. Not betrayal, but freedom. The possibility that you could choose yourself without being destroyed." 6 months after the crisis began, the family organized a modest dinner. Not a lavish banquet like Edward's birthday, just immediate family at the Whitmore estate. Edward asked if he could say something before we ate. "I want to acknowledge some mistakes," he began. His voice was quieter than his usual commanding tone. "For years, I believed that control equaled love, that if I could manage every outcome, I was protecting my family." He looked directly at me, but I was really just afraid. Afraid of chaos, afraid of loss. And I turned that fear into a system where everyone had to obey to prove they loved me. Catherine reached over and squeezed his hand, a small gesture of support. "Daniel showed me that real strength isn't control. It's letting go, trusting people to make their own choices even when those choices scare you." Edward's voice caught slightly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to learn that. And I'm grateful you didn't let me destroy you while I figured it out." The room was completely quiet. Everyone looked at me, waiting for my response. I stood up slowly, feeling the weight of 300 years of family expectation in that moment. "Thank you for saying that," I began. "It means more than you know. But I need to be clear about something." Edward's expression tensed slightly, old habits of expecting challenge. "I'm committed to my life in London, my career, my independence. I'll be part of this family, but I won't be absorbed by it. I won't carry guilt for choosing myself. And I won't apologize for having boundaries." I looked around the table at each of them. "I love you all, but I love myself too. And those two things don't have to be in conflict." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then Thomas started clapping. Slowly at first, then joined by Emily. Catherine was crying, but also clapping. Even Edward, after a pause, brought his hands together in quiet applause. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. It wasn't reconciliation in the fairy tale sense. It was something more honest. Acknowledgement, respect, the beginning of something built on truth instead of obligation. That night, I drove back to my hotel feeling lighter than I had in months. The Manchester streets were quiet, rain-washed, and gleaming under streetlights. I thought about the journey from Edward's birthday banquet, where I sat silent and erased, to tonight's dinner, where I spoke freely and was heard. The difference wasn't in them. It was in me. I had stopped waiting for permission to exist. Stopped carrying guilt that was never mine. Stopped shrinking to fit spaces designed to keep me small. My phone buzzed. A message from Edward. "Safe travels back to London. I'm proud of you. Not for what you've accomplished in business, but for who you've become despite everything I did to prevent it." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back simply, "Thank you." The next morning, I packed my things and checked out of the Manchester hotel for the last time. I was heading back to London permanently. No more emergency trips. No more crisis management. Just my own life. As I loaded my car, Catherine appeared in the hotel parking lot. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," she said. "I'm not disappearing. Just going home." "I know, but this feels different. Like you're not leaving angry anymore. Just leaving." She was right. I wasn't running. I was choosing. "Take care of yourself," I said. "Not just Edward. Yourself. I'm trying to learn." She smiled sadly. "It's harder than it looks." I hugged her briefly, then got in my car. Manchester faded in my rearview mirror as I drove south toward London, toward my flat, my job, my friends who had nothing to do with family legacy or guilt. Toward freedom. The message arrived 2 weeks later. Just a brief email from Edward. I've been doing some reading about family systems and control, about how fear can masquerade as love. I wanted you to know, understand now what I did to you. You were never my disappointment. You were my mirror, the one who reflected back all the things I was afraid to face about myself. Your independence showed me my need for control. Your honesty showed me my dishonesty. Your courage showed me my fear. I tried to break you because I couldn't break myself. I'm sorry for that, and I'm grateful you were stronger than my need to diminish you. You were right to choose freedom. I hope I can learn to do the same. I read the email several times. Then I saved it in a folder labeled healing. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just healing. The slow process of letting wounds close without pretending they never existed. Today I stood in my London office looking out at the city skyline. 3 years had passed since that birthday banquet. 3 years since I walked out of a room where I'd been erased. The Whitmore Holdings crisis was ancient history now. The company was stable under professional management. Edward had actually stepped back voluntarily, focusing on charitable work instead of control. We talked occasionally, carefully, honestly, not trying to rebuild what was broken, but creating something new from the pieces. Thomas and Emily had started questioning their own choices. Emily actually left the family business to pursue design work she loved. Thomas stayed, but on his own terms, not out of obligation. The family was smaller now, less polished, but more real. My career had flourished without the weight of family expectation. I'd been promoted twice, published research, built a reputation based on my own merit. But the real victory wasn't professional success. It was internal peace. I didn't wake up feeling guilty anymore. Didn't question whether I was being selfish every time I made a choice for myself. Didn't carry the weight of other people's expectations like a burden I had to earn the right to put down. Freedom, I learned, wasn't about cutting people off or burning bridges. It was about knowing that your worth wasn't conditional on other people's approval, that you could love your family without being controlled by them, that you could set boundaries without being cruel. They tried to guilt me into obedience, into sacrificing myself to save what they built, into carrying weight that was never mine to carry. I chose freedom instead. And standing here now, looking out at a city full of possibility, I knew I'd made the right choice. Not because it was easy, but because it was mine. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been made to feel guilty for choosing yourself, comment below and share where you're watching from. You're not alone in this journey. Subscribe to hear more stories about finding freedom when family demands obedience. Remember, you don't need permission to protect yourself. You just need courage. Until next time, choose yourself. You're worth it.